of this leads to this very strange undermining of Pete Hegseth, who, as all reporting has suggested, and my own conversations also confirm, is absolutely with J.D. Vance and Steve Witkoff on the side of restraint. And Hegseth has been a target of establishment forces in Washington from the time that he was nominated. Trump used a lot of capital to get him into that position, not because he's some sort of foreign policy dissenter. He has not been in the past. Quite the opposite. But his loyalty now is to Trump, and he has been siding with the America First foreign policy for the most part. He was obviously a big advocate of bombing Yemen, and I have a lot of opposition to that. But when it comes to Iran, he has been perceived as an impediment, and the people closest to him are now being targeted. And the Wall Street Journal, always the voice of the GOP establishment, not just when it comes to economic policy and neoliberalism, but also to GOP militarism, is very excited by exploiting the Pete Hegseth problem in order to do the following. This is their editorial from today called the Hegseth Pentagon Chronicles. Quote, no doubt the Beltway press would love to knock Pete Hegseth out as defense secretary, but that doesn't come close to explaining the mess at the Pentagon. The staff infighting, dismissals, and leaks over Signal app chats look to be a self-inflicted mistake of a management neophyte. If Mr. Hegseth is wise, here's what the Wall Street Journal says he should do. He'll use the staff shakeup to hire some loyal grown-ups who know the building instead of self-promoting isolationists he brought in. Look at that formulation. Hegseth hired a bunch of people who are become extremely skeptical of U.S. foreign policy, especially the idea of endless war in the Middle East, of war with Iran. And the Wall Street Journal is saying, look, we've stripped you of all your advisors. Now is the time to get ordinary establishment militarists surrounding you, as opposed to these war skeptics that you hired to be your closest advisors that are now gone. One of the people who was Hegseth's closest advisor, who was the target in kind of the fallout of this firing, he was escorted out of the office last week under very strange circumstances, is Dan Caldwell, a former Marine who has fought in wars and has that sort of skepticism about these wars from having fought in them that I've seen in many other people like him. Tulsi Gabbard has similar skepticism about regime change wars after having gone and fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. Lots of other people like that as well. And Dan Caldwell was interviewed today on by Tucker Carlson. It's a 90-minute discussion. You can find it on Tucker's show. It is about the dangers of U.S. military conflict with Iran, the multifaceted dangers, the bipartisan and multi-level pressures being applied to the Trump administration to pursue a war with Iran, notwithstanding the fact that there are no American interests there. And Dan Caldwell has an excellent grasp on the history of U.S. foreign policy. He's a young guy. He is not part of this kind of Republican militarism machine. He talks about how there's been this very clear breakdown in left versus right when it comes to militarism and interventionism. You find a lot of opposition to a war with Iran on the left and also the populist right. And those are the people who are being systematically targeted now within the Trump administration, hoping to amplify the voices of people like Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz and these other traditional neocons that populate the Trump administration. And I cannot recommend enough listening to Dan Caldwell speak to Tucker for 90 minutes about what he thinks, what he learned from his short time in the Pentagon, but also the broader experiences and foreign policy theories that have led him to this skepticism that has made him a threat to a lot of people in Washington. Now, I just want to conclude, because I want to bring on Lee Fung in just a second. One of the points Dan Caldwell made is that Trump absolutely is committed to the diplomatic resolution. He does not want to cast aside the possibility of diplomacy in pursuit of war, even though people like Tom Cotton and Lindsey Graham, all the usual suspects, Mike Waltz, Marco Rubio, are encouraging that. He's saying, I think we can do a deal that will result in assurances that Iran will not get a nuclear weapon. And a lot of the hardest core neocons, the most fanatical Israel loyalists, are going insane Because the idea of stopping Iran's nuclear program is the pretext. What these people want is a change in the regime in Iran. They want to go back to installing the Shah of Iran's monarchy that they installed back in 1954. And the Shah of Iran's son thinks he's the legitimate ruler of Iran. They want to put him back into office. Dan Caldwell called him the ultimate fail son. You may remember the Iraq War, the exact same strategies. They had a bunch of Iraqi exiles who had no connection to the Iraqi people, who hadn't lived there for 40 years, people like Ahmed Shamaldi, who was going to float in and govern Iraq once they got rid of Saddam as a U.S. puppet, a puppet of neocons, a puppet of Israel, just like the Shah of Iran was. That is still their plan. That is the real goal, to scare Americans about Iran's nuclear program as a pretext for changing the regime of Iran. Here's Mark Dubowitz from one of the most neoconservative think tanks in Washington, giving up the game because he's scared that Trump is going to succeed in diplomacy. He says, quote, "The Islamic Republic is weaker than ever, hated by most Iranians," meaning we're going to be welcomed as liberators, same thing we heard in Iraq, "hammered by the IDF and Mossad. Its terror armies, air defenses, missile production capabilities are in ruins. Never a better time to dismantle its nuke program and finish off the regime. Will another POTUS blink?" Meaning, will Trump be too scared to send Americans to go die for a regime change war in Iran, notwithstanding the utter and complete and total failure of regime change wars in the Middle East over the last 25 years, at least failure from the American perspective, not necessarily from the Israeli one. There's also an attack on Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence because she has been giving intelligence to Trump, saying that there's no good intelligence that Iran actually is moving toward a nuclear weapon, which U.S. intelligence has been saying for quite some time. And there's now an attempt, and this should sound very familiar to anyone who understands the Iraq War, on the part of neocons to target and coerce Tulsi Gabbard into altering the intelligence to say the opposite, that Iran is moving toward nuclear weapons to be able to justify the war. Like Dick Cheney used to go to the CIA, like Paul Wolfowitz had his own stovepiped information from the CIA. Lots of people in the CIA were saying there's no evidence Saddam had nuclear weapons, let alone biological and chemical weapons, and they went there and insisted and pressured intelligence officials to give the intelligence they wanted, that Colin Powell then destroyed his reputation by going to the UN to presenting, to justify the war. That's exactly what's happening here. Here from the journal American Greatness. DNI Gabbard must reverse, quote, stupid U.S. intelligence on Iran's nuclear weapons program. U.S. intelligence still claims Iran has no active nuclear weapons program despite stockpiles of near weapons-grade uranium and evidence of covert weaponization efforts. So they're saying the U.S. intelligence community, Tulsi Gabbard, have to change the intelligence from what they have, which is that Iran is not pursuing nuclear weapons actively, to say that they are, so that we can have a regime change war against Iran. Here is neocon Mark Levin, who cited this article today, said, very important, please read to the end. Red flags are everywhere. Can't say we've not been warned. What's going on here is as dangerous as it is manifest. These are the people who have led the United States into the most disastrous foreign policy debacles, the most destructive wars based on lies for decades. You can debate why they have an interest in doing that, but what we know for certain is it is not in the interest of the American people. It doesn't produce prosperity or security for the United States. In fact, the opposite is true. When you go around constantly invading other countries and meddling in other countries, you produce a lot of anti-American sentiment that leads to things like 9/11 attacks and other terrorist attacks, again, by people who are extremely angry that you're bringing violence to their country. It unites all sorts of countries in a coalition, in unison, against the United States, who, as Dan Caldwell pointed out in that great interview he did with Tucker Carlson, ought not to have anything in common. Why should Russia and China and Iran and North Korea be in an alliance against the United States, given their grave differences? It's because we forced them into one. We're turning the world against us with all of these constant wars that are in the interest of some people, the people demanding it, but certainly not in the interest of the citizens of the country who pay for it or who go fight in them. And the pattern should be so immediately recognizable to anyone who understands not distant history, but very recent history. Have you ever drank a cup of coffee that makes you feel younger? 1775's Rejuvenative Coffee is a bold dark roast infused with CAAKG, the same compound studied to reverse biological age by up to 8 years. It fuels your cells, sharpens your mind, and supports long-term strength, all without popping or a cabinet full of supplements or drinking swamp water in a bottle. This isn't lab junk. No mystery blends, just real single origin, small batch coffee roasted weekly with one powerful proven ingredient. Here's the best part. When you buy from 1775 Coffee, you're backing free speech, freedom of choice, and a company that backs the same creators and values that you do. No corporate overloads or overlords, just great products made for people who still believe in something real. Go to 1775coffee.com, grab their anti-aging longevity roast, and use promo code Glenn for 15% off. Feel sharper, stronger, younger, and know you're fueling the companies that actually give a damn about your health and about your freedom. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.